Sutton is out of town this week and will not be here. Councilmember Lanford is nearby and should be joining us shortly. We'll begin with the invocation and pledge tonight, led by Councilmember Dale Clark. If you would stand, please.
Our Father, we pause to express our thanksgiving during this holiday season for the abundance we enjoy. For blessing our nation, our state, our city, we thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to work at our jobs, to earn a living, and to provide for our family. We are grateful for the freedom we have in this country to speak, to vote, and to serve. We ask that your protection and blessing be on us as we celebrate Thanksgiving this weekend. And we ask you to bless the men and women who are away from their families, serving in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places to protect the freedoms we enjoy. Bless this council tonight as we deliberate and decide the business of this city. In your name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I want to begin tonight by welcoming Donna Bernard here to my immediate right. She is the city secretary tonight. Brenda Staub is taking a few days vacation, and Donna's sitting in very ably in that position. I want to take just a moment to wish all of the residents of Haltom City a very happy Thanksgiving. That's going to be here in just 2 or 3 more days, and we hope it's a time of Thanksgiving and celebration for you and your family, that you're kept safe, that you enjoy the provisions and blessings that we have in this nation. And as Councilmember Clark mentioned in his invocation a moment ago, I want to encourage all of us, while we are warm and safe and well fed, to remember the men and women who are serving this country in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places in the world to provide the freedom and the abundance we do have. We appreciate the service they render, and we wish them well during this time. We move now to the first item on our agenda tonight, and that is announcements and events. And Ms. Burns, I believe you have some announcements you wish to make to the citizens of Haltom City at this time.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Mayor. I have quite a few things actually to share with you this evening, and most of them have to do with the Christmas season. A couple of these programs are brand new this year, and they give residents the opportunity to share their resources with other people in need. The first one is the first annual Gary Hires Memorial Toy Drive. Gary Hires was the only officer killed while on duty as a Haltom City police officer. And in his memory, the department has organized this toy drive for the holidays. And they're asking that residents drop off a new unwrapped toy now through December 22nd at the Law Enforcement Center on Broadway. So if you have any questions about that program, you can call the police department at 222-7000. Another way of giving back to those in need is to adopt a Christmas wish for our animals that are in our Haltom City Animal Shelter, the Nancy P. Watkins Animal Care and Adoption Center. Both at the library and at the adoption center itself will be a Christmas tree, and on the tree are items that you can pick up and provide for that facility and donate. If you have questions about that, you can call the library at 222-7786. There are a lot of things that the animals that are at the shelter are in need of. So, and that is being sponsored by the Paw Pals, which is the volunteer group that supports the Animal Care Center. The third thing is a Christmas program for children. It's the annual holiday story time. It's called the Truly Texas Christmas. It's Thursday, December 16th at 6:30 p.m. at the library, and there'll be a craft with a Texas flair, stories, refreshments, and a puppet show. Number 4 is the annual Christmas dinner for Haltom City seniors, and that takes place at the Christian Center of Fort Worth, which is actually in Haltom City at 4301 Northeast 28th Street. Happens on December the 18th, which is a Saturday, from 11 to 1, and seniors and those in need can come and have a nice holiday meal for free. And those that cannot get out and come to the dinner can call ahead of time, either the police department or the senior center, and arrange to have a meal dropped off. Volunteers are needed, so I hope that if you've got some time that day, you'll come out and be part of that program. It's very rewarding. And the last thing that I have to talk about is our Dickens on Broadway community tree lighting. Hold on, I have to get in costume. Okay. Now, Lady Allison is going to help me with this. Lady Allison. Okay, here she comes. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Yes. Okay. Dickens on Broadway is going to occur on December the 2nd. That's a Thursday evening from 6 until 9. Of course, as you can tell, it's a themed event. We ask that all residents and attendees dress in Dickens-era costume. If you need help with your costume, you can call Allison at the library or myself at City Hall. It's really easy to put these costumes together, and it's a lot of fun. We'll be having a costume contest. Other things that we'll be having is holiday music, carriage rides. Santa Claus, of course, will be there. Train rides, children's crafts, food concessions, craft vendors, photos with Santa Paws, and of course, you can, if you'd like to drop off a toy for the I don't know. Well, he's not here. Oh, that's right, he's not here. If you'd like to drop off a toy for the Gary Hires Memorial Drive, that'd be great. And of course, we're going to light the tree. So we hope you'll come out. There's no admission charge. And again, it's a lot of fun.
What date is that?
That is,
Mr. Eklund, are you really going to take pictures of this? Preserve this for posterity?
it is Thursday, December the 2nd, from 6 until 9 p.m. here at the City Hall complex. So please join us. Any questions? You guys look great. We did. I think you.
Thank you.
Thursday. This is a week from this coming Thursday.
I'll give this to Mr. Sell.
Thank you.
If we have to pass an ordinance that the city manager wears one of those things, then let's do it, okay?
I'll second that, Richard.
Thank you, Ms. Burns, for the information. Of those of you who may not know, Ms. Burns is our public information officer here in Haltom City, and I do think it's appropriate for, my job is to maintain order and decorum, and the way y'all are looking at us and laughing at us with this, we probably need to take those off at this time. Thank you. That's very cute. We move now to the capital improvement status report. Mr. Muir, what do you have for us?
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we're going to start off with a couple of the street programs. Garland Street, that's in a business industrial district. The water and sewer mains have been finished. The storm drain is also complete. However, with the somewhat inclement weather we've had over the last few weeks, the paving has been delayed. So as soon as the weather clears up, that will commence. Project was originally slated for completion in late January. That will probably change, be put off a few weeks. Georgian, the underground utilities are complete. That was a project that is being done by the staff. However, in doing that project and in dealing with some of the utilities, the staff noticed there were some problems with some gas lines. Staff contacted Atmos Gas, which used to, TXU Gas sold their gas company to Atmos, so it's now Atmos Gas. And Atmos has developed a plan to take any corrective action, and as soon as the weather cooperates, they'll get down in there, and when they finish their work, then we will get in there and pave the street. But we didn't want to pave a street and just have them tear it up for the gas lines. So I know the citizens on Georgian have been very patient, and we're hoping that they will continue with their patience as we correct that problem. The overlay project, the 2004 overlay project, and it's a street overlay and curb and gutter rehab. This is a $343,000 project that covered several streets. Fincher Road from Broadway south to 28th Street, Haltom Road from 28th Street south to 121, Sabel from Jean to Stanley Keller, Bernice Street from Oak Knoll to Waldemar Street from Oak Knoll to Belknap, Golden Oaks Drive from Diamond Oaks Drive to Cedar Crest Drive, Emerald Oaks Drive, again from Diamond Oaks Drive to Cedar Crest Drive, and Hollis Street. All those projects have been done, so the overlay program has been completed. And again, that was for a total of $343,000. And some of the building projects, the Municipal Service Center, Phase 2, which is the construction of the Fleet Services facility. The only things that really kind of remain there are some building signage, hose reels, dealing with an air compressor to either repair it or replace it. Phase 3, which is the demolition of the old Fleet Services facility and constructing a new facility that will be used for storage. That has been, as I've reported earlier, the old Fleet Services have been demoed and the building structure is up. Light fixtures have been installed, and there's power to it, plumbing to it. Heaters are in. There's some vents that are still on back order, some exhaust fans and louvers. But the project is very close to being substantially complete. It's my hope that certainly by this time next month that I'll be able to say that. It's very, very close to being complete. There are a few things still have to be done, such as landscaping and stuff, but it's very close. On the rec center, with the numerous problems that we've had with it, I do have some positive things to say tonight, in that as far as some of the leaks that have been dealt with, the leaks have been largely abated. There are just a few minor ones that are still hanging around, but it's not nearly what it was or what we've been experiencing over the time, especially with the wet weather that we've had. The electrical problems that we've had with the generator and the wiring there seem we're very close to executing an agreement with that. So I think last month I was expressing some frustration about how that collapsed. That has we're seemingly being able to rectify that, so hopefully that'll be done here in the next couple of days. I walked the facility the other day. It's really taking shape, and I know it's been a long time, but it's I'm very confident this will be a facility that this town can take a lot of pride in, and I know it can't possibly be worth the wait, because we've waited way too long as it is, but it'll be a fine facility. There are it could be done by the end of the year. I'm not optimistic that it will be, because with some of the weather issues and some of the other issues that have come up lately, but there is some very positive progress that have been made, so it is coming to an end. I'll close with making a few comments about the library. We haven't really addressed it too much, because we've been in negotiation for a land buy. We had to commence condemnation proceedings. That's now at the court level, and until it's very difficult to develop a timeline for this project until we have the land in hand. And since we're at the mercy of the courts, it's very difficult for me to determine when that'll be. We've made some requests for discovery from the other party. Made several requests. They have largely been ignored, so we're still dealing with that. But we've got every hope and expectation that this also will be a facility that the community can take a lot of pride in. Again, I can't. So much is contingent on the land buy. Once we get the land in hand, then I'll be able to develop a fairly definite timeline for when that facility will be complete. And I know a lot of citizens have been frustrated. I know my office has gotten a few calls regarding what's going on with it, because I think we were kind of blowing and going with it there for a while, and I just didn't anticipate the land, the problem with the land deal. I just didn't think it'd be this much of a problem. But with that, I'll take any questions regarding this report.
Members of the council, any questions for Mr. Muir? Any comments regarding the report he's just given us? Okay, there being none, we move to item number 2, the October monthly financial report. And this is Mr. Joel Welsh, our Director of Finance for Haltom City.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Enclosed in your packet is the monthly financial report for the first month of fiscal year 2005, that period of ending October 31st. As is customary, the first 4 pages after the table of contents provides an executive summary of the major funds and significant events, and I'll just touch upon a few things that are noteworthy. At least at this point after the first month, there being only 1 month of activity, there's not a great deal to talk about in terms of the operations of the funds at this point. Property tax revenues, of course, are very slow for collection in October. The bills go out either at the very end of September or the very first part of October. Mortgage companies don't pay until typically November and December. So collections during the month of October are typically very modest. So, but I would mention that the sales tax information in your packet, on beginning on page 11, will kind of give you a look at the collections for sales tax over the last 12 full months. And I'm pleased to report that the sales tax activity in the city has been positive. We have pretty much reached a point in terms of sales tax collections to where we're pretty much, at least in current dollars, back to where we were before Kmart and Winn-Dixie closed. In real dollars, it's a little different picture, but in terms of current dollars, it's much better. Some efforts that the city has made in getting some of the sales tax collections straightened out in terms of what the business is paying for Haltom City instead of Fort Worth has also helped in this effort. So the sales tax collections have improved. Water and sewer sales are moving pretty much along with expectations for thus far this year. The yields on the investment portfolio, and that's the report that begins on page 16. I mentioned this in the workshop, but we've been very happy to see the yields, the market yields on our investment portfolio increasing markedly from the 1.27% that the portfolio was earning back in April to 1.82% for the period ending in October. And of course, this is due to, like I said, some market conditions improving, but also some efforts on the part of the staff to invest more money into securities and certificates of deposit with longer maturities that are allowing us to have a better performance on the portfolio. An example of that would be a security that we bid out for a 2-year term that the bids came back in today, and I looked at them and approved the purchase of a security carrying a face of 3.3%. And so it's an opportunity that the staff has to aid in the financing of city operations through the investment portfolio.
Mr. Muir, question or comment from you? Members of the council, any questions from you or any comments regarding the October financial reports? Okay, there being none, I need a motion with regard to approval. Councilmember Lanford.
Well, I did have a question from Joel. What what drives the ability to invest in longer-term portfolio as opposed to short-term portfolio? Well, I mean, what would typically, why would you not always do that?
We perform studies of our flow of resources, as money comes in and goes out for payroll and bills and other such things, and we're able to determine from the seasonal spending of the city that there's a certain portion of the portfolio that has to stay short-term to meet cash needs, and then there's a portion of the portfolio that is essentially reserved for either future expenses well down the road or for emergencies, and it's that emergency money that we can invest longer. And over a period of time, we're rebalancing the portfolio a bit. At this point, about 30 to 35% of the portfolio is now being invested out a year or longer. Usually, we're not investing longer than 2 years on any purchase, but we're now investing more in the 1 to 2 year range to capture a better yield on the portfolio. And like I said, we're up between 30 and 35% of that now, and we're going to be increasing that percentage a bit more over time.
Well, if it's money that is kept for emergencies and you've got it in a long-term obligation, how do you bridge that gap?
We do it because all of the money is invested in a staggered fashion to where there's money maturing every month. And if it turns out that we don't need the money, we reinvest it because we know that we have another security maturing the next month. And so that's called laddered investing. And so we just ladder all of our securities out and have them mature one after another.
Okay, does that have anything to do with the plain size of the budget? I mean, or the revenue and how it comes in? I mean, does that? I mean, obviously it plays a part, but I mean, is it the bigger the budget gets, the more you can do that, or is it?
The bigger your budget gets, yeah, there is a capability of being able to do more of that. My plan with the investment portfolio has been to have one maturity every month. And if the portfolio gets bigger and the city budget gets bigger, what would happen then is you would go to a situation where you would have 2 maturities a month or 3 maturities a month. Okay. And we basically, because I try to maintain approximately the same size of the amount of each investment.
But this is not basically a savings account for the city. It's just a plan structure to keep the money that we know we're going to have making some money for us until we need it.
Yes, sir. The focus of our investment policy is to preserve the money, not to lose any money on investing it,
right,
but yet also at the same time to maintain enough money to always have money on hand to make our bills, which is liquidity. And then our third focus after safety, after liquidity, is to get the best yield that we can get safely.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Holcomb, you had your light on next, I believe.
Yeah, if there weren't any other questions, Mayor, that was to move that we accept the financial report.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the financial report as presented. Councilmember Hutchison.
That would be a second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? If you will register your vote, I will display it at this time. And it passes by unanimous vote of the council present. We come now to the consent agenda, and if you're following along on your agenda, we are removing item 9 and 10 for individual action. That leaves items 3 through 8 for the consent agenda. The consent agenda is considered to be self-explanatory and will be enacted by the council with one motion. Authorization by the council, approval by the council authorizes the city manager just to implement those in accordance with the staff or board recommendations. So I'm ready for a motion regarding the consent agenda consisting of items number 3 through 8. Councilmember Bransom.
I move we accept the consent, we pass the consent agenda, removing items 9 and 10.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second? Councilmember Hutchison.
That would be a second.
Have a motion and a second to approve. If you will register your vote at this time. And that passes by unanimous vote of the council present. We come now to item number 9. Mr. Muir, you want to introduce this or tell us how we'll proceed?
Mr. Pliska is going to walk us through this item, please.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, citizens of Haltom City. This week, there were some concerns raised and a question was asked by my department concerning the gas ordinance, the gas drilling ordinance that appearing before second reading at tonight's council. The question asked was whether or not platting requirements would be triggered with a gas well permit. And the answer to that question, as our ordinance, our zoning ordinance stands today, yes, it would be required if the property is not platted. A legal lot in Tarrant County plat records, platting would be triggered. That would be section 38, subdivision requirements in which no permit shall be issued for any construction or to establish a use on any site unless the same is identified in an approved subdivision filed in Tarrant County plat records. What we have in the subdivision ordinance that would address that, let's say, for example, an applicant came forward to the city for a gas well permit and was not on platted property. It is included in the city's subdivision ordinance at this time without any change or amendment to the city's subdivision ordinance. Article 7, which is a modification waiver in which you have in hand tonight, in which Article 7-100, the Planning and Zoning Commission may recommend and the City Council may authorize a waiver from these subdivision regulations when in its opinion an unnecessary hardship will result from requiring strict compliance. And it goes on in Article 7-101, the process in granting this type of waiver. So you have in-house for an applicant to pursue a waiver to the city's subdivision ordinance, which is required by the city's zoning ordinance to be addressed if indeed the property is not platted in which they wish to apply for a gas well permit. So I guess our question is tonight, and this has arisen on the second reading, if the council wishes to address this issue, either leaving these vehicles in place and pursue those actions if the property is unplatted, or to amend the ordinance before you tonight encompassing a blanket statement in the ordinance to allow gas wells to not trigger the platting requirements.
Members of the council, any questions for Mr. Pliska before we recognize 2 citizens who have requested to speak on this item? Councilmember Lanford.
Thank you, Mayor. James, as we discussed in pre-meeting, the issue of platting basically is triggered because of the use that the oil and gas well, or the gas well, is a use per se, and that's then what triggers the need for platting. However, as we discussed, it appears to me that this is a very specific use, not a normal use in any commercial or residential sense, such that, you know, curbs and gutters and sewage would not be necessarily appropriate or needed for to drill for gas. The only concerns I have about two going in, one, it appears to me that platting doesn't provide the city with doesn't provide us with any protection that I can see, but I want to make sure that safety, number one, is taken care of if we decide to table this and send it back for removal of the platting provision. We discussed 2 things: drainage, which platting would take care of, and fire protection, which platting would would provide for water, make sure that there was appropriate water and water available there. And again, in the pre-meeting, it appeared that in the case of, say, a grass fire or any other kind of fire that could exist today without a gas well present would be taken care of if the same way whether a gas well was there or not. I mean, in other words, if there's a fire hydrant available, it'll be available. If there's not, then the fire department's got ways to get to a fire without a fire hydrant nearby. And the other issue was if there was a catastrophic fire, if the gas well just blew up and caught on fire, not a likely event, but possible, that all the fire trucks in Haltom City wouldn't be enough to put the fire out. I mean, we'd have to have some very specific and professional people to put that out. Is that a good understanding? Is that a fair
That is a
understanding?
good understanding and a good point. The reason this is in the city's zoning ordinance is zoning wants the orderly development of the city.
Right.
Okay, and it's just looking at it as blanket uses throughout the city. Okay, we want to make sure that there is orderly development throughout the city. And that orderly development, of course, is public safety, but also the extension of our water and sewer lines and the extension of perimeter streets, which
Sure.
is what plating, and drainage issues, which is what plating is required.
Right.
And you are correct. It is, again, then you can be more specific than the ordinance itself and go in and modify or adjust those uses, just like the zoning ordinance does in the use matrix and the subdivision of the districts as well. It could be viewed, for example, breaking down this particular use as a temporary use. The fact that you're drilling the well, you don't know whether or not it's going to be a successful well. And then again, you could look at it from a perspective, well, yes, it is a permanent use, okay? In that some wells last 40 years, if indeed it is a successful well. But then again, will the well occupy the whole piece of property? So then again, you could look at it as, well, is it a primary use of the property or is it a secondary or accessory use of the property? So yes, you can actually go in and specify these uses, and that is, again, what some of the other cities have done with these blanket statements.
Well, let me ask you in a specific scenario. Let's say that we had a gas well actually drilled in Haltom City on property that was not platted. Later on, if that same property or property that had the gas well on it, say a businessman wanted to put a building there. Now that's a different use, obviously. What happens then? That property must be platted because of the different use.
That is correct, as long as this section of the city's zoning ordinance is not amended or modified.
Yeah. Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hutchison and then Councilmember Clark.
Mr. Pliska, would you also explain the cost of the waiver process? That seems to be somewhat of a topic of discussion in pre-council chambers, too. We had a discussion about the waiver process, and it's pertinent to, I think, even for specific use as well as the platting use, too.
Thank you, I will. Again, the modification waiver that appears in the city subdivision orders, or the generic term, which is a variance, we've heard before this body before, and you've heard it planning and zoning before as well. A variance is a relaxation of the ordinance or not meeting the specific requirements of the ordinance, and is either addressed by the Zoning Board of Adjustments or the City Council in specific cases. The fee for that, as it appears now in the city subdivision ordinance, because it comes before planning and zoning and it comes before council, the fee for that would be $100. That would cover the cost of the city's advertisement in the paper and the 200-foot notifications to notify every property owner within 200 feet.
Councilmember Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. James, as I understand, the policy and ordinances that we're dealing with now that were originally written were for usage, which are buildings, structurals, businesses, curbs, sewage, the normal land use that a city comes in contact with every day, correct?
That is correct. The uses of a property, again, kick back to the way the zoning ordinance looks at it and views it. There is an only exemption for uses in the city's zoning ordinance is the agricultural use, as
Right.
it is at this time.
Yeah.
All the other uses that are in existence when this was written, yes, would utilize that. They would use paved streets, they would use curb and gutter. They would need to know the drainage information and make sure meets the ordinance requirements of draining to that public street. And then, of course, the necessary infrastructure for water and sewer. The reason for the triggering of the subdivision ordinance is because somebody wants to develop the property in order to fully use the property. Well, the city is not a developer. As we all know, the city inherits this type of infrastructure once the developer dedicates it through the platting process. Then, of course, it's required for us to keep it up. Only in certain terms, like in economic development or in a program plan, does the city actually tackle the creation of infrastructure, so to speak. But
Right.
yes, that is correct. When this ordinance was written in 1998 and when it was amended in 2000, that ordinance was for prescribed uses of those properties and the infrastructure or dynamics that are triggered by that.
Right, so it's either agriculture or uses of business 9 to 5 or uses of residential 24/7. And what we're looking at now is a steel pipe, a steel mechanism, a dam, a dike encompassing it, grassland outside of that, and tanks to provide the structure. So we're looking at a different entity now, a different creature.
Yes, sir. You can, again, go in, like I said earlier, and modify those types of uses, for example. But at the same time, that ordinance is there to protect against some person wanting to set up possibly a shanty or a tent on that property without the proper infrastructure and beginning a use of that property without putting in those necessities in order to fully operate like the ordinance says in the first place for orderly and safe development, basically.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for Mr. Pliska? Councilmember Lanford?
Thank you. I forgot to ask James earlier about the other issue was drainage. Again, if we were to exempt or remove the platting provision for the gas well use, in the process of drilling, there has to be built a retaining pond for all fluids that are associated with the drilling. There's nothing in the removal of this, or if we left it in a waiver, that would negate the responsibility of the drilling entity to provide that pool.
That is
or
correct.
drainage pool.
That is correct. Both
Yeah.
in the ordinance itself, which specifies the necessary specifications for that, for public safety and for environmental issues, but also the state laws govern that as well. Primarily from platting, what we would secure would be drainage information. Not so much the fact that it's going to be a problem and we're going to fix it, but the fact when you plat, you have to hire an engineer, particularly on those large tracts, that gives the city information on the flows and the direction of
Correct.
any type of precipitation.
No, normally, what does a drainage study cost if you got a?
Again, it depends on the size of the tract, but on the average, it applies several $1,000s to the platting process
Okay.
in order to pay for the engineer's fees.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Councilmember Branson?
Thank you, Mayor. James, first off, I want to thank you for doing your job. I think everyone should realize it's James's job to bring all these situations before us to help us make a decision. So thanks for doing your job and being so thorough. Actually, I have two, and they're miles apart. The first one is when Mr. Lanford was talking about removing the platting provision from the gas ordinance, that would primarily affect the urban wells, wouldn't it, due to the distance requirements?
That is correct.
Okay, so those would be the ones that are sitting out on some pretty good sized pieces of property, maybe lower end of town, guesstimating, of course, something like that. Okay, I just wanted to be sure I had that part right. Well, now I forgot my other question. I had it in mind. Can I come back to it if I think of it after we have to? Thank you.
Anyone else on the council have a question for Mr. Pliska? Okay, there being none, our first member of the audience, a citizen who wishes to address the council on this subject, Mr. David Harper. Mr. Harper, if you'll give us your name and address for the record, and you're familiar with how we proceed here, you have a 6-minute time period.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. David Harper, 5600 North Beach. From what I'm sensing, I don't want to go over old material. I'm sensing what I was going to say was a common sense approach to this. If anybody wants orderly growth and forward movement of the city, it's me, and I think you know that. More than a decade of work that I've done trying to do that. But in this particular case, and we talk about large tracts of land, I'm very familiar with a piece that's like 38 acres. And to do the platting and the infrastructure on 38 acres, that would be a large cost. An engineering study on 38 acres would be a lot of money. So what I'm just urging you to do is take the common sense approach, which is what I think what I'm sensing from some of the council members, and amend the ordinance to not trigger the platting in the urban well. Thank you.
Any questions from the council? Any comments? Thank you, Mr. Harper.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, Mr. Gene Snow. Okay, Mr. Snow, before you come up, light came on real quick. Councilmember Branson.
Well, actually, Mr. Harper triggered my question that I had for Mr. Pliska, and Mr. Snow may have been going to address it. When you were mentioning laying the infrastructure, the sewer and the water lines and the platting process and the engineering study and that sort of thing, what kind of time frame is involved between when that starts and when they could actually see if a well was a possibility there?
Yes. Generally speaking, the platting requirement, of course, depends on a lot of factors. The size of the tract of property, as Mr. Harper brought up, the large amount of infrastructure that might be required as well. But that is largely dependent on whether or not they hire a good firm that knows the city's subdivision ordinance and can do the turnaround that's required, a review of the ordinance, see what is required by the ordinance, put that on paper, do the survey, the field work, and submit that to the city for inspection. Then there's a kickback on editing and review to clear their mistakes or anything of that nature. And then at the same time, they have to draw up construction plans once the preliminary plat has been approved to address the infrastructure needs and, of course, submit the drainage study. But on the average, we do have an average figure for that. It is 90 days for a good one, but more likely 120 days.
And then after all the paperwork's done, then there's a time frame where you're actually expecting the infrastructure to be in place before they actually start to explore for gas?
Actually, the platting requirements just simply are that the construction plans be drawn up for that, and of course, once the plat is filed, then infrastructure would be developed at that point as well.
Is there a time frame that it has to happen within a certain period of time?
No, the plat needs to be filed, though, after 6 months after it's been approved.
Okay, thanks.
Hutchison.
Mr. Pliska, Mr. Harper also triggered a question in myself too. I'm very much interested in taking a common sense approach to this, but if we put a well on, say, a 38 acre piece of property, and then all of a sudden somebody wants to come along and say, okay, we want to put a bunch of building structures, does that automatically trigger the platting process because of the change in primary use of that property? Or do we decide, or does your department decide, as a P&Z decide, what is the primary use of that property again?
Okay, and again, the ordinance is treating the well or the drilling as a use. With the matrix that we developed in as one of the second or the following agenda item here as well. It's just throwing it in with all the other uses. But yes, we would view that as not the primary use of a 37 or 40 acre tract of land. In fact, even on a much smaller scale, I'm certain a well only occupies maybe even the area of this room after drilling, so to speak. So it could be viewed immediately. It could be viewed immediately if you so choose to do so, or if we looked at it, staff looked at it from that point of view as an accessory use. That may be the owner's decision. Maybe it's only primary use as well. They may not want any further development. But yes, specific answer to your question, any further development would trigger platting.
Anything further? Now, Mr. Snow, if you will give us your name and address for the record, and you have 6 minutes.
Okay.
Time
My
limit.
name is Gene Snow. My address is 5719 Airport Freeway. And I've got about 25 acres there of my own. We've leased about another 130. Plan on drilling maybe as many as 3 wells down there. So I'm very interested in how this all comes out here. Now, I'm here to answer questions probably as much as anything, but I certainly would like to see the platting process omitted from the necessity for us drilling a well. We don't do anything really permanent other than leave a piece of pipe, some fittings, and some tanks that has an embankment around it in case they were to break into spill. Leaving the development of buildings or houses or whatever else we might need, the city might okay to put there, easily accessible. But for us to go in and put curbs and gutters and study the drainage, since we're probably not going to spill anything, seems like an unnecessary thing to happen. So it's my suggestion, and I'm asking that, and I think that's what everyone's kind of in agreement to maybe look at either the variance deal, as James mentioned, or just putting that the platting process is not applicable to drilling the gas well.
Any questions or comments? Councilmember Lanford.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Snow, now, if you don't do a drainage study per se, how do you figure out where to put your retention pond? And, I mean, you just kind of look around and
Okay,
see which way the water's running? And
No, let me tell you kind of how that works. And to drill the well, we find out where we want to drill it, and we have a surveyor come out, and there's he tells how many feet it is from the survey lines, and that's where we drill it. All right. Then we move out over here, and we take a bulldozer and we dig out ponds. That's not the right word. Reservoirs for the drilling mud, and it doesn't really matter where the drainage is because it doesn't get out of there. The drilling mud is kept in the very tank that you build. And if it was on the side of a hill where there would be a lot of water running to it, then you would build a kind of a dam around it so the rainwater wouldn't get in it and make it overfill. That's kind of a standard procedure in the business. But we dig pits, we call them, and we line them with plastic so that the drilling mud won't get into the soil, and when we get through, we pump it out and make it all level again. So we just conform to whatever area we're having to work in. If it's on the side of a hill, we put a dam to keep the water out. If it's basically flat, the drainage isn't a critical item.
Thanks, sir. And in regards to safety, in particular fire safety, I guess would be the biggest concern I would have as a citizen and elected official. I certainly am aware that drilling for gas, you're going to be taking some real caution not to have any sparks and catastrophic fires. But can you share with us a little bit of your experience with fire safety around gas? And I mean, I think you said that you had a business not too far from where you might be drilling, and so you had a natural interest in safety. So could you
We're going to be about
comments?
400 feet. Our office is from where we're going to be drilling one of the wells. Excuse me. When they drill the well, there's an extraordinary amount of safety done. There's all kinds of fire safety equipment, and when they're turning right, as we call it, drilling the well, we have first set surface casing down probably 400, 500 feet. Then we set what's called a blowout preventer on it. Then we rotate and drill down through that, and if something were to happen, let's say the well were to kick, as we call it, trying to blow out, they hit the hydraulic ram and it just seizes against it, and gas can't get out. And so that prevents that right there, and then you pump the heavy mud in and kill it and start your drilling again. There's been so many wells drilled, even in this area up around Saginaw and out at Marine Creek Lake, and the safety is just an understood thing. I mean, we're just watching every minute for something. Sparks probably wouldn't even be that big a deal because there's no gas escaping. The gas is all controlled. You don't even hit the pay zone till 8,000 feet. So the first part you're drilling through the shale and the limestone, there's no gas in it anyway. And when you get down there to to the pay zone, as we call it, we up the weight of the mud. That's a drilling fluid that we circulate the solids out and keep it suppressed. And it's pretty cut and dried. It's pretty safe.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Snow. I think everyone has asked questions of you that had a question.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Okay, Council, we're ready now for the council to take action regarding this, any discussion you choose to have. It appears to me that there are three options the council has. One is to approve this ordinance on second reading as is, and as is means triggering the full plating process. We could amend this ordinance on second reading with slight modification. Or number three, a possibility, we could send it back to staff with specific direction, and it would come up for second reading at a later meeting of the council. There may be other options beside those three, but those are three that seem pretty clear to me at this time. Councilmember Hutchison and then Councilmember Lanford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd propose, I would make a motion that we would table agenda item number 9, ordinance 0-2004-025-15, send it back to the staff with a specific requirement to remove the triggering of the plating amendment that is in the ordinance at present time.
We have a motion before us, and I need a question for the attorney. Councilmember Hutchison used the word deny. Is that an appropriate
I guess I need to have the motion restated. I didn't hear the deny. What I understood the motion to be, and Councilmember Hutchison, I'll have you restate it just to make sure, but I understood that his direction was to just send it back for staff to develop a new ordinance that amends the requirement to plat.
I'll restate my motion then, and I'll remove the word from deny if I said that. I apologize, Mr. Mayor. I would propose that we would send that we would table agenda item number 9, which is ordinance 0-2004-025-15, and send it back to the staff to remove the provision in the ordinance that would trigger the plating requirement. That would be my motion, sir.
Thank you. We have a motion before us. Do we have a second? Councilmember Lanford.
Well, before I proceed with a second, I have a question. Is it possible to amend the motion to include agenda number item let's see, was this, item 10 as well? I mean, those two move hand in hand. Can we do that?
Do we need to do that with two separate motions since it's listed as two separate items, Mr. Attorney?
You can do them at the same time. Let's talk out loud about this before we get on down the road. What is actually going to happen here? First off, does the council have a desire to return this to the Planning and Zoning Commission for input on this, or you just basically want to have an ordinance brought back to you with the proper language in it to vote on as soon as we can?
Okay, is that a question you're posing?
Yeah, that's a question on timing on this. This is a matter, my understanding is this didn't come up at the Planning and Zoning Commission meetings. It's something that they didn't have any input in, and if you desire their input, you can get it. I haven't heard any discussion that you desire input from Planning and Zoning Commission, but if you don't desire to send it back, then basically, as I understand the motion that's pending, yeah, it would be somewhat to treat this as a direction to staff to bring back another ordinance, which we'll do at the next agenda and have you vote on it at that point in time.
I guess it was my assumption if we sent it back with directions to remove this, that we would get the input from planning and zoning. I mean, anytime it comes through there, I would assume that we get their input.
Okay, the motion did
body.
The motion did not reflect that, and so probably, are you asking?
Well, yeah, if we need to, I would, to clarify, certainly I would seek the Planning and Zoning Commission's input, along with directions to remove the need for a plat.
When you say input, are you saying just make a comment, or are you talking about to take action on this? And bring a recommendation?
This didn't start out to be that difficult for me.
You're right. It is somewhat more difficult than it probably needs to be.
Yeah.
But I guess we need.
I mean, I don't want to say something, I don't want to send something back to P&Z and tie their hands. I mean, if they've got something, some input or some observations or some questions, I want them to ask them.
Let me ask the question this way. From what Mr. Pliska has handed out tonight, it seems to me that the amendment that needs to be made to reflect this council's direction is to clarify Section 38 that says that no permit shall be issued for any construction or to establish any use on a site until a plat is filed. Amend that to create an exception for gas drilling permits.
I think that's certainly what my intent is, yes.
Okay. All right. Let me tell you, my concern about this is we're now revising a section of the zoning ordinance that hasn't had any input from anybody. Section 38 hasn't been reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission or staff. It's a new issue that's come up, quite frankly, on this matter. I think the council's got two directions they can take. One is send this back to P&Z and get their input, bring it back to you after they have given you input, and then it'll take two readings of this council when it comes back. Alternatively, you can approve the ordinances tonight and direct staff to initiate an amendment to Section 38 of the zoning ordinance and bring it back to you as soon as possible. In the meantime, anybody who makes a gas drilling permit application is going to have to plat, but at least the procedure, at least your ordinance will be in place while the platting requirement is being reconsidered.
Well, given that information, I think for me, it makes sense that we no longer delay approving this and we attack the Article 38 issue separately. I mean, that makes sense to me.
I think what I'm hearing the council, the direction from the council is probably best to go ahead and approve these ordinances on second reading tonight and direct staff to initiate a revision to Section 38 of the zoning ordinance and bring it back to you as soon as we can.
Well, in that case, I ask Mr. Hutchison to withdraw or restate his motion to that effect, and include that would be an attachment to the motion to address Article 38 of the zoning ordinance.
I don't have any problem with that. The question I have is, how long is that going to take? How long is it going to take to go back through the Planning and Zoning Commission? Are these guys ready to drill right now? Mr. Pliska, could you answer that for me?
Yes, sir. I'll be glad to. We have a meeting, of course, tomorrow night, and that will be our last meeting for November. We do have one meeting in December. I believe it's the 14th, without a calendar in front of me. That meeting appears to be, we could add it at that point, discuss it if and bring it forward to you, of course, if the Planning and Zoning does approve it. However, there will not be then, of course, a December meeting of council, is my understanding, and then we'll be reviewing that in January then.
In that case, then, I'll withdraw my motion, Mr. Mayor, and defer to Mr. Langford. He probably has a little bit better way of stating this than I do, so I'm going to let you do it, Mr. Langford.
I don't know about that. Thanks a lot. Well, in that case, I move that we approve ordinance O2004-02515 on second reading with the provision that we direct the Planning and Zoning to look at Article 38 of the zoning ordinance to remove the platting requirement for the gas wells.
Okay, everybody understand the motion? Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Councilmember Branson?
But I have another idea.
Okay.
What if, in the oil and gas ordinance, we revise the part that says the gas well permits required by this ordinance are in addition to and not in lieu of any permit which may be required by any other provision of the code? If we take that piece out, Does that undo the plating?
I don't think it does undo the plating requirement, because it's the zoning ordinance that says that any permit that's required to develop a property instigates the plating
Okay,
requirement.
so there's no way to tweak that sentence to keep, I'm trying to keep it from being January or February before we hear this again.
Well, if you would like, we can revise the language. Again, we're talking about an interpretation of the zoning regulations. The zoning regulations do require plating whenever any permit is issued for the development of property. So that's the issue we're dealing with. What we cannot do tonight is amend that section of the zoning ordinance. It
Right.
has not been discussed by anybody. It's a new provision that nobody had debated before tonight. What you can do is put language in your oil and gas ordinance, if you want to amend that directs that no additional permits shall be required for development. I don't know what Pandora's box that's opening up, but basically that'd just be direction to staff to allow applications to go forward. And I don't know if that'll change Mr. Pliska's interpretation of Section 38, which just talks generically about permits, but if the oil and gas ordinance discusses that an oil and gas permit is not going to require the initiation of plating, it's basically conflicting with the zoning ordinance, and Mr. Pliska could make an interpretation whether one ordinance is going to prevail over the other. But the bottom line is this issue hasn't been addressed up till now, and I think Mr. Pliska's interpretation is that the zoning ordinance requires plating, and I agree with that interpretation.
Did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to approve, as Councilmember Lanford stated a moment ago. Councilmember Holcomb, I believe your light was on first.
That's for a second to approve the ordinance as stated by Mr. Lanford.
Councilmember Hutchison.
I would second that too.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Clark.
Yes, sir, for clarification. To do the amendment on Section 38, is it going back to the committee or is it going to staff?
It will be going back to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir, we will be glad to take that on the December 14th agenda to planning and zoning.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion? If you will, register your vote. And that passes by unanimous vote of the council present. And I do want to say to the citizens who are watching and the ones here in the audience, we've kind of struggled a little bit here tonight. And as has been said, this is the first time we've addressed this issue. So we have made an effort to be responsible. We want to do this right. And if it takes going back and making some adjustments, we want to do that because we want to have a good product here when we walk away from this with final approval on the second reading of this ordinance. Okay, we go now to item number 10, I would assume. Okay, item number 10, Mr. Pliska or one of the members of the staff, you want to address item 10, please?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This is the second reading for the gas drilling and production ordinance. I've already discussed the major issue right now, and I'm ready to answer any other questions you might have.
Any questions for our city engineer? Okay, I believe there are none. I'm ready now for a motion regarding item number 10. Councilmember Lanford.
Move to approve ordinance 02004-02615 on second reading.
Have a motion to approve. Councilmember Hutchison.
That would be a second.
Have a motion and a second to approve this ordinance. Any discussion on the motion? If you will, register your vote at this time, please. And that is a unanimous vote of the council. Item number 11 is a public hearing, and we will have this item introduced. It regards a budget amendment. And Mr. Muir, is that something you want to introduce, or how shall we proceed?
I guess I'll introduce it. Number 11 is is an ordinance that will establish the budget for the drainage utility. When the FY 2004, 2005 budget was approved, back in September, the drainage utility was not in place yet. The council just approved, placed that into place within the last 30 to 45 days. This ordinance will establish a budget for the, for items in the drainage utility for us to be able to operate. It'll make it similar to the other document that you guys approved in September. With that, I'll take any questions. Staff is available. I don't know if Joel or David, if you've got anything you want to add to it, or just be, I'm seeing just available. Okay, they'll be available for any questions, but this again is the first reading of this, of the ordinance. It'll take effect, assuming that the council approves it on December 13th, on second reading.
Okay, we are ready now for, first of all, questions from the council regarding the information that Mr. Muir just presented. Do we have any questions for him before we open the public hearing? Councilmember Lanford.
So just so I'm clear and clarify it for the citizens, this is the piece that, the formality piece that will let the stormwater utility, we talked about dirt could fly by February, that this is the piece that's going to let that happen. Is that right? I mean, we've already got approval for
Yes.
for the
Yes,
machinery, and this is going to put.
There are several pieces.
Several pieces of this, yeah.
Item 6 was one of those, and item
Yeah,
7 was
right.
one of those. Next meeting will be another piece, but this is the pinpoint, the cornerstone of
Right.
that. Without this budget amendment, without a budget, then we won't be able to operate at all.
Okay,
Have to have it.
hear you.
Okay, since this is a public hearing, I'll open the public hearing at this time for any member of the audience who wishes to speak either for or against this budget amendment to implement what you just heard the city manager present. Do we have anyone who wishes to address the council on the subject at this time? Okay, there being none, I close the public hearing and we move forward now, ready for the council to take action regarding ordinance number 2004-027-03. What is the pleasure of the council regarding this? Councilmember Reese?
Thanks, Mayor. I would like to move to approve ordinance 0-2004-027-03.
Councilmember Holcomb?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve this ordinance. Remember, this is a first reading. It will come back for a second reading at the next council meeting, Mr. Muir. Okay, if you will, register your votes. And that passes by unanimous vote of the council. We move now to the Visitor Citizens Forum portion of our meeting. And let me read the disclaimer I'm required to, for sake of clarity regarding this portion of the meeting. This time is set aside for any person having business before the council that is not scheduled on the agenda to have an opportunity to speak to the council. All comments must be directed toward the presiding officer rather than to an individual member or staff. Each speaker must limit his or her comments to the subject matter listed on the speaker's request form and must refrain from personal attacks toward any individual. A 6-minute time limit will be granted to those who have filled out the request to address the council. And because this is not posted in accordance with the open meetings law here in Texas, council cannot discuss or debate any issue brought forth at this time, nor can any formal action be taken. Our first speaker to address the council tonight, Mr. Jim Barton. Mr. Barton, if you will, come forward, give us your name and address for the record, and the subject on which Mr. Barton wishes to address the council, illegal parking and trespass in relation to the city zoning ordinance section 33.8 and H. Mr. Barton.
Mr. Mayor, I have some handouts, if I might. Mr. Mayor, Tom, council members all, I appreciate you letting me come tonight. My name is Jim Barton, and I have property at 5716 Airport Freeway, just south of Gene Snow, on the south side of the freeway. I've owned this property for about 13 years, and I run my business out of it. Plus, in my building, I have tenants. In March year 2002, a funeral home moved in across next door to me, which separates, Cypress Street separates my property and the funeral home that is renting from a Miss Rubin. I might add real quick that in accordance with the budget member, I do pay sales tax. The people in my building pay sales tax at Haltom City as well as property tax. I know this is an event-oriented business. It's the type of business like you build it, they'll come. It causes lots of congestion. I'm in a very, very nice part of the commercial area of Haltom City. Hawk Electronics, which employs around 300 people, is my neighbor right next door to me on the east side. We all try to get along. The gentleman who owns all the warehouses in back of me, Dan, and his letters in there, he owns a sizable amount of warehouses behind me. We've all pretty much been affected, at least Dan and I, from the funeral home parking and the congestion caused by hearse, family cars, etc. From the outset, my property's been used for their commercial use and benefit to park. They have very limited parking. Richard Torres, back in year 2002, came out to my property and was just overwhelmed when he saw one of the funerals, and he just immediately put up no parking signs along Cypress Street. It's a very narrow street. An 18-wheeler can barely get up it. And all the warehouses behind me are all commercial, and they have to have 18-wheelers, and Rainbow Bread trucks come up and down Cypress all day long. I've contacted James Pliska. He wrote this letter to the owner of the property, Ms. Rubin. She, in turn, is making money, so she could probably care less. I also, Dan and myself wrote personal letters certified to the funeral directors and tell them not to park on our property. We've posted signs on all of our property. We've never had a problem in this part of Haltom City, but we do now with parking and congestion. If you'll let me refer to the City of Haltom City letter written by James Pliska, it states in the middle paragraph that as per Haltom City zoning ordinance, all allowable use must provide sufficient off-street vehicle parking. This off-street parking shall mean all areas dedicated to parking and maneuvering, which means the hearse sitting in the street, congesting, waiting for people to come out, visit with their relatives, and line up. We've all been to a funeral. We know it takes time for everybody to get in their car and follow the hearse on out. Well, it must be on site. In addition, all off-street parking must be permitted in any street right-of-way. It will not be permitted in any street right-of-way. Now, I'm not a real good speaker, so if I miss some of these words, but you can see that over the years I brought this up to the City of Haltom City. Tom Muir and I have been talking, and Tom is well aware of my problem. This all came to a real big head on about September the 6th. They had a huge biker funeral, and I have pictures. I know you don't want to see them, but Tom has seen them. I had about 250 bikers come down the road, and they just took over my property. One of the guys walks in, the hog Harley, the tattoos, and says, "We're going to have to use your property for funeral parking." I said, "Sir, it's posted. I'd rather you not." He says, "Are you telling me we can't park?" And I said, "I'd rather you not." And he says, "You'll be sorry." At that time, I called 911. They dispatched Officer Rucker out, and she was overwhelmed. I said, "You better get back up." But, I told the gentleman, I said, "Look, I didn't want my building burned down or anything like that." I said, "I think we can talk," and I went ahead and let him park. And I have the incident report as part of as part of my, I didn't hand it out, but I have incidents reports on that particular problem, and it's on record here with Haltom City. That incident report, I might say, and I have a slew of incident reports, having called on parking, and you know, when you go up, you feel sorry for people going to a funeral. You hate to go up and tell them to move or they're going to be towed. They get a little irate, especially if they're late to the funeral. We've all been late to a funeral. They get pretty doggone PO'd. And consequently...
Mr. Barton, your 6 minutes is up in just a few seconds, but I'm going to extend to you another minute and a half to wrap up.
Well, to make a long story short, incident reports on file. After that threat, I decided I needed an attorney. I employed McDonald Sanders. They wrote the funeral home saying, look, either cease, get the right parking, get yourself together, and like any business would, if you build it, they'll come. I have to provide parking. They, in turn, sent another letter back just saying, hey, you know, sue me. So I'm at that point. I'm just out of gas. I've come to the city council, and I need some help. Not only that, most of us property people around there, Ms. Walden, and the rest of us need help. It's when they have huge funerals, and most of these funerals are a lot of them are small, but a lot of them are big. I'm talking 70, 80, 150 car funerals. Where do you put them? They got to come to my land and everybody else's. They have no facility. I thank you, Council.
Mr. Barton, I think you're aware, as I read in the statement to begin with, that the council cannot make comment. We can't deliberate regarding this. I can make a statement of fact. You're contacting the city manager is the appropriate channel for this to be addressed, and whatever way that progresses, the appropriate channel for you to address this with is through Mr. Muir. You have comment?
Everything he's right, and I mean there seems to be a problem out there. It's at least from what I've observed, it's gotten a little bit. It's gotten a little bit better in that they are. I think funerals trying to get people to adhere to the not parking over there, but it mainly comes down to Mr. Barton shouldn't have to be out there shooing people off his property to deal with this. And the biker funeral and the funeral he had Friday, I was down there at that. There were an awful lot of people down there. It's a problem. What I'll do is I'll respond to the council with everything that we've got here, so that you know what as far as from the city standpoint what can be done, and we'll see what we can do. We'll also meet with we've gotten with PD, we've gotten with planning. I mean, there's certain things in the codes that the facility only has to provide parking for one space per 4 people that is there and the building is sized for. Well, typically for funerals, they don't typically come 4 in a car. They come 1 or 2 to a car, so you get a lot more cars coming out there. So it's just like you said, it's event driven. It's seems to be a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. Our next speaker is Mr. Eklund, Ray Eklund. If you would come forward, give us your name and address for the record. You wish to speak on the subject of the Citizen Forum, and you have 6 minutes.
I do, Mr. Mayor. My name is Ray Eklund. Actually, the Citizens Forum is what we're here about, and I want to extend my thanks to the citizens of Haltom City. The website that we operate, haltomcitycitizen.com, is just celebrated our 1st anniversary. We've had 1.5 million hits in the last year. We've added approximately 50 pages per month. We now have over 500 pages for people to come and view about Haltom City, and discussions and opinions and comics and all kinds of things to try to spread the good news about Haltom City to the rest of the world online. We're about promoting Haltom City, about about telling the good things that we do here. We featured stories about people and different items throughout the city and the events that the Haltom City staff puts on. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the visitors and the council, the staff that keeps us informed so we can pass the word along. And also I'd like to thank our volunteers at HaltomCityCitizen.com, especially Ms. Edens and Susan Witt, who's here with us tonight, and R.D. Milholland. We would like to continue to be an informational source for the citizens, and we'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity to serve this past year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eklund. Our third and final speaker is Terry Haley. Terry? Yes. If you'll give us your name and address for the record, and you have 6 minutes time limit. Pull that thing down. Yeah.
My name's Terry.
And I believe you wish to speak on the subject of 9/11.
No, the 911.
The 911.
Emergency.
Okay, yes, okay.
Terry Haley, and it's 3732 East Ridge. And on November 12th, we had an incident where someone was shooting at our back patio door. We thought it might be a BB gun, but we weren't sure, so I called 911. And they kept shooting till they finally shot the door out. I called a second time and told the operator they shot my door out. Nobody still showed up. My husband called back. It took him like 19 minutes. And I've talked to Sean Holt here at the police department in the, I believe it's professional standards. He said that it was a problem partly with the operator, the way she classified the call, and partly that 30 minutes after the shift started, there was no officer available. There was only like 4 officers out, and they were all on a call. We were terrified. We had no idea whether this turned out to be a 10-year-old kid with a pump-up air rifle. But we didn't know that for sure. It was loud. It was hitting the glass, and it finally broke the glass. And I just, it was just unacceptable that it took that long, and especially after the second call where I said the glass was shot out. My husband called back a third time and said, my family's under attack. How long is it going to take you to get here? And we just wanted to bring that. And I believe that Detective Holt will address this with the supervisors, like he said he would. But I wanted to bring it to your attention, too.
Can you tell me again when this happened? What
This
day?
was November 12th, and there's a police report. Officer Brooks is the one who finally got off a call and handled it. He was fantastic. He was able to, this kid lived behind us, and, he was bored and didn't, that was what he chose to do till his TV program came on, and he did get the kid. They've partially paid for the cost to fix our door, and supposedly are going to pay the rest in a few days. But he was he got the child. He brought him, made him talk to us, brought his dad. He was real good.
Okay.
So,
Well, I'm sorry that it took so many times. I mean, obviously,
Yeah, well,
we don't like that, but I'm glad
Yeah.
nobody was hurt.
No,
and I'm
but we
glad
were
things turned
terrified.
out. Well, I understand that.
Yeah,
And that's most unfortunate, and we certainly don't want to see that. But we'll, like you said, I'm sure Officer Holt will be following up, and I'm sure he'll be following up with you, but we will follow up with you and let you know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haley. Patricia Conley, are you in the audience tonight, if you would go ahead and be coming up. We do not have a speaker's request card filled out on you. And I understand this is your first time here. Normally, we limit a speaker, if they don't fill out the card, to 3 minutes. I'm going to extend a courtesy to you tonight to go ahead with the full 6 minutes if you need to. Would you tell me what you want to speak to us regarding?
Yes, utility bills for low income, such as people on Social Security and Social Security disability.
Okay. If you would go ahead and go to the speaker stand, Ms. Conley, and yes.
Just be sure and give us your name and address when you start your presentation.
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Patricia Conley. I live at 3913 Kirby Street in Haltom City. And last year I was talking to a cousin of mine in California, and she was saying how nice her grass was and how pretty it was and everything. And I have to discontinue watering anything around my house because I can't afford it. I'm on a fixed income, and I know there's a lot of people here in Haltom City that are on fixed incomes. And I said, how can you possibly afford to run your water all that much and have such pretty flowers? Because she's got a garden and everything. And she told me that the city that she lives in is a small farming community. It's a town, small town. But she said that they have a fixed income thing for people with Social Security and stuff, where they just have a certain rate that they ask them to pay, and it doesn't matter how much they use, not as if I was going to waste it or anything, but that doesn't matter on how much they use and stuff. And I came up here last year before everybody was voted in, and they told me that it would be a good idea for me to wait until everybody did get voted in, and I've been in the hospital and sick for a couple of times, and I haven't had time to come up here. And when I talked to the lady, she said that it was secretary, it's not this lady, but it was the other secretary, I guess, that was there. She told me that if I come up here and spoke to you, maybe I could possibly talk to you about it and everything. And then I came up and I talked to Tom Mura the other day, and he told me that the lady told me that it had been on the agenda, and you had talked about it before all election and everything, but they had tabled it, I guess, and nobody had done anything about it, and I was wishing that you could help us out, because living on fixed income is not easy. And that's about all I have to say about it, except please help.
Thank you, Ms. Conley. Mr. Muir, any comments?
No, just for those council members who may not, who weren't here at the time, what she's talking about is probably about a year ago, the council at that time had discussed providing a discount off the water bill for seniors and disabled, but it never really got off the ground. I think there was just a little bit of talk about it, but nothing was really, no direction was provided, no plan was put in place, and of course at that time things kind of got going where the staff's attention was diverted elsewhere. But that's what Ms. Conley is referring to. As she said, we did talk in my office last week, and there's, in her situation, I explained to her that, the city does do quite a bit for seniors, but it doesn't really address tenants or renters. So, and that's mainly what she's here to address.
Thank you, Ms. Conley.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We move now to the next item on the agenda, the resignations of board members. Councilmember Bransom, I believe you have a resignation.
Yes, sir, I do. First I want to say that Betty Porter has decided to resign from the Beautification Board effective December the 31st. I think it's important to know that she spent more than a decade on this board and currently serves as the chair of this board. So she's leaving to pursue other opportunities. She's going to be working with the Historical Society and has a really big goal in getting the old Birdville history where it's accessible to everyone. So that's very much their gain. Actually, it's going to be all of our gains because we'll all benefit from her tenacity at digging up information. So I want to thank Betty for all of her years to the city and for what she's going to be doing in the future, even though it's not on a city board.
We will vote to ratify that resignation in just a moment. I think Councilmember Lanford has a comment.
Thank you, Mayor White. Yeah, I just wanted to add just the comment that certainly I'm going to miss Betty's leadership on this board, and certainly will look forward to her being more active in the history of the Birdville area. But I just want to say how much I appreciate her, and it seems like every time I've been to a city function where the City Beautification Board was involved, and sometimes other things too, that Betty was there, and she's been very active in this city and supportive as a volunteer, and certainly appreciate her efforts.
Well, no doubt Betty is a very special lady, given a lot of hours, and will continue to be helping to make Haltom City a better place, and we do appreciate what she's done. I need your vote at this time, indicating your preference on ratifying the resignation of Betty Porter from the Beautification Board. And that does pass by unanimous vote. Any other resignations? I don't believe we have any appointments or reappointments. Councilmember Branson.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to recommend for appointment to the Zoning Board of Adjustment, Bayjoy Turner on East Ridge as an alternate for place 7.
Okay, we have a nomination of an appointment of Bayjoy Turner as an alternate to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. If you will, register your vote regarding ratification. And that passes by unanimous vote. We do have one member of our group tonight who is absent, taking a few days off out of state with his family on vacation, in the person of Councilmember Jim Sutton. I do need a motion regarding whether or not to excuse this absence of Councilmember Sutton. Councilmember Hutchison.
Yeah, reluctantly, I do make a motion that we accept Jim Sutton's absence as an excused absence.
Councilmember Branson.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to excuse. If you would register your vote, please. And that is a unanimous vote. That being done, we have addressed all items on the agenda. Nothing to be discussed in executive session. We stand adjourned.